We didn't have flak guns, we didn't have radios, we barely had boots, but we had our rifles and we had our rage. I remember the sky that day, pale gray like the belly of a dead fish. It hung low over the Belarusian marshlands, blanketing our trenches in a cold that bit through every thread of our tunics. We were the 321st Rifle Division, freshly transferred from the south, where we had been mauled retreating from Kharkov. We were bloodied, broken, and barely held together. And yet, somehow, we were still breathing. Comrade Lieutenant Ivan Grigorovich stood at the edge of the trench with a pair of field binoculars, lens cracked, wrapped in canvas and hope. He was staring up at the sound, those dreadful, stuttering growls that echoed through the clouds like distant thunder. Stukas. There was no mistaking that howl. The Jericho trumpet, the Germans called it, sirens bolted to the undercarriage of their dive bombers to terrorize men like us. It worked. I saw it every time, the way fresh conscripts flinched when they heard it, the way veterans clenched their jaws, like they were chewing on a memory they couldn't spit out. But this time, something was different. Ivan didn't flinch. He turned to us with a calm I will never forget. "Rifles up," he said. A few of us laughed. At first I thought he was joking. Shoot at dive bombers with Mossens, our ancient sticky bolt-action rifles. It was absurd, madness. And yet he said it again, louder. "Rifles-up." We had no anti-aircraft battery, not even a Degtyaryov or a single Maxim that worked reliably in the cold. Just us, 36 exhausted men with half a box of cartridges each. I could already see the black shapes forming overhead. Tiny specks at first, then rapidly growing larger, 12, maybe 14 Stukas, peeling off one by one into steep dives. The sirens screamed to life. It was like the sky itself was screaming at us. That's when I saw him, Andrei Sokolov, a tractor mechanic from Smolensk turned corporal, standing up in the trench, rifle tight to his shoulder, tracking the lead bomber with eyes like steel. And then he fired. I still remember the crack of his Mosin rising through the chaos, the way it cut clean through the descending roar. One shot, then another, then more. Suddenly we were all standing, no longer hiding, firing up into the belly of those diving monsters like men possessed. It wasn't strategy, it wasn't training. It was defiance. I fired 3 rounds at a bomber that came screaming toward our trench, no more than 200 meters above. I could see the pilot. I could see his goggles. And for a brief, surreal second, I swear to you, I saw him flinch. The bombs fell anyway. Mud and snow erupted into fountains of death around us. 2 men were blown to pieces. 1 more was crushed by the collapsing trench wall. But then, we heard it. A sputter, a cough, and a distant crack-whump from behind the trees. Sokolov shouted, pointing skyward. A black shape twisted, spiraling downward with smoke pouring from its fuselage. One of the Stukas was hit bad, and we had done it. With rifles. The sheer impossibility of it hit me like a slap. We had taken down a dive bomber with nothing more than the same bolt-action rifles we used to shoot rabbits before the war. Word spread fast. Across the front lines, from trench to trench, radio to runner, someone was saying that the 321st had downed a German aircraft with small arms. And not just once. That day, 3 more Stukas fell. One crash-landed behind our lines, its wings riddled with holes. Another came in too steep and never pulled up, plunging nose first into the frozen marsh. The last tried to limp back toward German lines trailing black smoke, only to be picked off by a lucky burst from a DP-27 in a neighboring unit. It wasn't a miracle, it was math. Dive bombers came low, very low at the last second, and for a brief, terrifying moment, they were close enough for us to fight back. That night, as we huddled in our reeking foxholes, passing around a half-frozen can of pork, we didn't talk about fear, or frostbite, or the corpses still buried under the rubble. We talked about the men in the sky, the ones who would come again tomorrow, and the rifles we would raise to meet them. Sokolov cleaned his Mosin under the flicker of a stolen German lantern. He said nothing, but I could see it in his eyes. He'd tasted something rare, a sliver of power in a war that had stripped us of everything else. And that power was about to spread. By dawn, the story had already mutated. We were no longer just a battered unit crawling through the muck of Belarus. We were legends, the riflemen who shot the sky. I overheard it from a supply officer the next morning. "The 321st is doing anti-air work now," he said, laughing as he handed out 3 moldy loaves of bread and 1 can of condensed milk for a platoon of 40. No one believed it at first. Even we barely believed it. But then the captain from headquarters came down, an NKVD observer trailing behind him like a shadow. "You fired on dive bombers," the captain said, not asking but stating. "You brought them down with Mosins." Sokolov nodded once. The captain looked around, squinting at the pockmarked ground, the broken tree lines, the black smear in the sky that still hadn't faded. "Do it again," he said, "and write down everything." That day they assigned us 2 sketchy privates with notebooks and pencils, political officers, commissars in training, they called themselves, but to us they were sponges, watching, recording. We didn't care. Let them write their stories. We had a job to do. The Luftwaffe came back that afternoon. And this time we were ready. Sokolov stood at the forward line with 6 hand-picked men, guys with hunting backgrounds, sharpshooters, or just those who had learned the subtle art of aiming while shells exploded around them. They carried Mosin Nagants like relics of a lost world, many with the stocks wrapped in cloth to keep hands from freezing to the wood. The idea was simple: wait until the Stukas committed to their dives, then shoot. It defied every instinct. You had to stand still while death shrieked down from the clouds, then raise your rifle and fire into that screaming face of metal and glass. But it worked. On the second pass, we got one. His name was Anton Dyachenko, 21 years old, from somewhere in the Donbass. He lined up just as a Stuka peeled off, diving almost directly at us. He waited until the nose tilted downward and then, crack, a clean shot. The gun's recoil snapped his shoulder back, but he didn't flinch. The bomber flinched. A puff of smoke burst from the Stuka's engine cowling. The bird jolted midair like it had hit an invisible wall. It wobbled, leveled too early, and then clipped a pine tree, ripping its port wing clean off. It dropped into the forest like a hammer, the siren still wailing even as the wreckage vanished behind the canopy. We cheered, not because we were happy, but because we were alive, because the sky wasn't theirs anymore, not completely. The Germans noticed. By the 3rd day, their formations shifted. The Stukas no longer dove with impunity. They came higher, faster, dumping bombs early, sacrificing precision for safety. That made them less deadly. It also made them angrier. That's when the strafing started. FW-190s, the fighter bombers, mean-looking things with radial engines and 20 cannons. They didn't scream like Stukas. They growled, sweeping low over our lines like scythes. The first run shredded an entire trench. 12 men dead before anyone realized what was happening. And we couldn't shoot those down. They were too fast, too high, too aware. That's when the idea was born, quietly, among the men bait. We found an old German anti-aircraft emplacement, abandoned. The gun was gone, stripped and carted off, but the wooden scaffolding was still there, painted with green camo and surrounded by crates that had once held ammo. We repaired it, not to shoot from but to look real, a decoy. And then we put 6 men around it, not on top, around, camouflaged in the brush, buried in snow up to their waists, rifles in hand, watching the sky with hunters' patience. The Luftwaffe took the bait the next morning. 3 FW-190s swooped down, unleashing cannon fire on the fake AA position. Tracers stitched the wooden crates into splinters. But the gun crew never moved because there was no gun crew. As the third plane came low, too low, our men opened fire. Not one shot, 6. 7 rounds hit the fuselage. 2 more punched through the cockpit. The plane pitched violently, clipped a telephone pole, and tore itself apart against the frozen earth. The pilot's body was found 2 days later in a nearby ditch. No shoot. The commissars wrote feverishly in their notebooks. It kept happening. Not every day, not every plane, but just often enough to matter, and the idea began to spread. Other divisions caught wind of what we were doing. Not officially, never officially, but word passed down through truck drivers, messengers, rear-line cooks who'd heard that some Siberians took down a Stuka with hunting rifles. And soon, men started trying it. We were moved east, a rail junction near Vitebsk, bitterly cold, snow falling sideways, and a new commanding officer, Major Pavel Isyev, a brick of a man with eyes like slate and a voice that made even the political officers sit up straight. He didn't believe in our tactic. "You think you can snipe planes out of the sky?" he asked Sokolov. Sokolov didn't flinch, only the ones foolish enough to come low. Isyev laughed. "Then let's see if you're good enough for the ones that don't." He ordered an experiment. An observation balloon, German, captured intact. He had it floated up to 600 meters with a flare dangling from its tether. "Hit it," he said. We tried, 20 men, 50 rounds each, not a single hit. He turned to walk away. Then a quiet voice spoke, "May I try?" A boy stepped forward, barely old enough to shave. His name was Yuri, our youngest. He was a farmhand before the war, no formal training, just eyes. He raised his rifle, waited, the wind shifted. Crack! The flare burst in midair. The silence that followed felt like the pause between heartbeats. Isyev nodded once. "You're now in charge of instruction." That's how it began. Zagradatriad Vozdishnik Strelkov, the air denial rifle platoon. Unofficial, unrecognized, but real. A rotating squad of marksmen attached to frontline units, trained to read flight paths, to estimate angles, to fire with patience, not panic. We used every scrap of knowledge we could find: German field manuals, hunter's guides, old artillery triangulation sheets. We even scoured physics textbooks from village schools for equations about velocity and angle. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't easy, and it wasn't always successful. But every once in a while, a plane would fall. And it changed everything. By spring, our unit had downed 15 confirmed aircraft, with no anti-aircraft guns, just Mosin Nagants, nerves of iron, and a terrifying willingness to stand tall while death came screaming from above. It wasn't until later, much later, that foreign correspondents picked up the story. An American journalist, embedded with a tank brigade, wrote a short piece titled, "The Russians Who Shoot at the Sky." It was dismissed as propaganda, fabrication, Soviet mythmaking. But the wreckage was real, the kills were real, the men were real. And they were just getting started. By the summer of 1944, the riflemen who shot at the sky had become a rumor wrapped in steel. We weren't supposed to exist. The Soviet General Staff never mentioned us in dispatches. We received no medals. Our names were not printed in the Krasnaya Zvezda, the Red Star newspaper. But every frontline soldier from the Baltic to the Carpathians had heard the whispers. They bring down planes with bullets the size of a finger. They use animal grease to keep their bolts working in the cold. They never flinch, not even when a Stuka dives right at them. None of it was strictly true. And yet none of it was entirely false. Operation Bagration, June 1944. We were attached to the Fifth Army as it pushed through Belarus like a tidal wave. The Germans were collapsing, falling back in disarray. But that didn't mean the Luftwaffe had disappeared. In fact, the more desperate the Wehrmacht became, the more aggressive their air support turned. Ju-87s, HS-129s, and occasionally FW-190s swept in low over the treetops, targeting bridges, rail chokepoints, and supply convoys with fanatical intensity. And that's when we truly became useful. We moved ahead of the main spearheads, embedded with recon units always near key crossings. Our job wasn't to engage the enemy on the ground, it was to watch the sky. We had no uniforms to distinguish us, no special insignia, just scarred rifles, patient eyes, and a hatred of the buzzing monsters above. They assigned us a truck, an old Zai S5 with a patched canvas roof and holes in the floor. We kept our rifles wrapped in burlap soaked in lamp oil to protect against the dust. We slept under the truck at night, ate raw onions and black bread, drank from rivers, studied the clouds. Because now we had techniques. Angle fire protocol. That was the first, developed by Isiev and refined by Sokolov. It was all about timing. You never fired as the plane approached. You waited until the last second, when it was pulling out of the dive. That's when the underbelly was exposed. That's when the engine was most vulnerable. That's when gravity worked with you. We found that a round fired at a 65-degree upward angle at a target no more than 300 meters above had a chance, a real chance, to pierce a cooling line, a fuel pipe, a hydraulic system. The Germans never expected resistance at that moment. But we were there. July 5, 1944, the Vipske Highway. 3 panzer divisions were pulling back through a forest corridor. Soviet IL-2s were hunting them from the air. In response, the Germans sent their own escort fighters, Bf-109GS, flying low over our lines to suppress AA guns and ground troops. But they didn't expect us. We positioned ourselves along a ridge, 5 shooters spaced out over 300 meters, each with pre-designated overlapping fields of fire. We used charcoal to mark distance notches on the inside of our rifle stocks. No optics, just irons. The fighters came in fast, over 400 kilometers an hour. But as they passed, we opened up not at them, but at the spot they would be 5 seconds later. One plane, a 109 with the yellow nose of JG-54, jerked suddenly mid-flight. A puff of white mist sprayed from its rear fuselage. Then it shuddered, dropped altitude, clipped a treetop, and exploded in a tangle of smoke and pine needles. No one cheered. We simply recorded it, chalked it onto the inside of the truck canopy. Kill 19. We began tracking our success, not for ego, but for data. Kill 20, Ju-87 dive bomber, hit during pull-out phase, fell behind enemy lines. Kill 21, FW-190, engine fire after triple-shot volley at low altitude. Kill 22, HS-129B flying tank buster, struck in starboard wing, crash-landed with one wheel. Of the 22 confirmed kills by late July, 11 were documented by multiple officers, 6 were witnessed by forward observers, and 5 were confirmed through captured German reports. But we knew the truth. There were more, dozens more. Some went down behind enemy lines. Some limped back smoking, only to be written off at Luftwaffe airfields later. Some were never even recorded, disappearing into forests, swamps, or rivers. And still we remained ghosts. August 2, 1944, Eastern Poland. We encountered something new. A lone American reporter, part of a Lend-Lease liaison team, joined our column near Lublin. His name was Harold Winslow, wore a felt hat and suspenders over his uniform, carried a notepad like it was a weapon. He heard about us from a drunken Red Army artilleryman. "You shoot planes. Winslow asked, incredulous. No, Sokolov said. We shoot at planes. Sometimes they fall. Winslow insisted on seeing it for himself. The next morning, a reconnaissance Bf-109 came over our position at low altitude, photographing rail junctions. We were already in place, 3 of us, camouflaged under broken fencing and torn hay bales. The moment the engine passed overhead, we fired. The plane continued, then dipped sharply, trailing a stream of dark smoke from the tail. Winslow stared open-mouthed. Later he wrote, I witnessed with my own eyes a group of Russian soldiers fire bolt-action rifles into the sky and down a Messerschmitt. I wouldn't believe it if I hadn't seen it myself, but the laws of probability apparently bend when you're Soviet and angry enough. The story ran in a small U.S. outlet, didn't go far. But within weeks we began seeing something strange. Copies of our tactics, Soviet infantry units drilling with upward fire stances, posters showing riflemen pointing at the sky, even instructional pamphlets, crude, mimeographed sheets with silhouettes of German aircraft and labeled Vozdechne Australia, air shooting. It was out, no longer a secret. But we were still alone in one key way. We had become addicted. There was something about it, something visceral. To face the sky, the great untouchable killer, and strike it down with your hands. It gave us a sense of control that few soldiers ever tasted. We started naming the planes we dropped: Black Eagle, Broken Tooth, the Screamer, each one marked with a small drawing carved into the truck's wood slats. Sokolov started carrying a small notebook where he diagrammed each kill, the trajectory, the angle, the moment of impact. He wasn't just surviving war. He was studying it. And yet we all knew it couldn't last. September 1944, the Niemen River. The front was moving fast, too fast. We were leapfrogging villages, advancing through burning wheat fields, sleeping 2 hours at a time. There was no time for tactics, no time to dig in and aim at the sky. And the Luftwaffe had changed. They no longer came in low. They knew. We saw it in the way they stayed high, fast, unreachable. When they bombed, they did it from 3,000 meters. When they strafed, it was in fast, unpredictable zigzags. They had learned, adapted. And so did we. Sokolov proposed a new idea: broken arc firing. Instead of aiming at the plane directly, we predicted the arc of its exit, where it would rise after a bomb drop, and fired ahead of the climb. Like leading a pheasant with a shotgun, but at 300 kilometers per hour. It was insane. But on September 12, it worked. A Ju-88 bomber came in low over a village near Grodno, dropped 2 250 kg bombs on a supply dump, and began to rise in a shallow climb. We fired 4 rifles at the predicted apex. 2 of the shots missed, 1 sparked against the wing root. The last punch through the right engine. The bomber limped, wheeled east, and spiraled into a barley field. We reached it before the Germans did. Inside we found the pilot, alive, burned, dragging himself from the wreckage. Sokolov approached. The German looked up, gasping. "Flak?" he asked in broken Russian. Sokolov knelt beside him and said, "No flak, just men." That night we buried the German crew with full honors. We even marked the grave with a salvaged prop blade. Sokolov sat by the fire, staring at the sky. "They're not gods," he said quietly. "They just forgot how close the ground can reach." By the end of that month, our team had 28 confirmed kills, more than some AA batteries. But our numbers were shrinking. Petroshenko was killed by mortar fire. Mikhailov went home with frostbite that took both feet. Young Yuri was taken by a sniper while repairing a scope that had frozen open. And Sokolov, he was beginning to cough. Badly. We were not immortal. We were men with rifles and lungs full of smoke and mud. But as long as planes flew low, we would keep firing. Because we had become something more than infantry. We had become the last defense between the sky and the earth. And the world was finally beginning to take notice. The sky changed when we crossed into East Prussia. It felt heavier, colder. Not just the weather, it was the silence. The forests here were thick with mist and broken trees. You didn't hear planes until they were already overhead, and by then it was too late. We'd lost our truck in a river crossing 2 weeks earlier. The last of our food rations had turned to mold in a canvas sack. Sokolov was coughing blood now, but he wouldn't stop. He refused to be reassigned. He said, "My war ends when the sky forgets my name." We followed him. It was in those woods, near a ruined village called Allenstein, that we saw the first jet. It wasn't supposed to be real. We'd heard whispers, tales of a German wonder plane that flew faster than bullets. Officers dismissed it as fairy tales. Even our own pilots scoffed at the idea. But on October 21st, we saw it with our own eyes. A silver streak across the treetops, no propeller, no whine of pistons, just a low, howling shriek as if the forest itself were being split apart. We didn't even have time to raise our rifles before it vanished into the fog. The men just stood there, frozen, watching the vapor trail hang in the air like a scar. Sokolov broke the silence. "They made a demon," he said. From then on, everything changed. No longer were we fighting to keep bombers from hitting convoys or to protect the infantry from dive bombers. We were racing against time. The age of the rifleman versus aircraft was ending, and we all felt it. But not yet, not completely. Because not all the Luftwaffe had gone jet. The old birds were still there, especially at night. And so our mission shifted again. Night operations. It started with flare traps. We set up small decoy fires on clearings near the front line. Using scavenged fuel and oily rags, we shaped the flames to mimic artillery positions or vehicle parks. The Germans would send overnight bombers, Heinkel He 111s or Do 217s, drawn in by the glow. And we would be waiting. The trick was simple. You didn't aim by sight, you aimed by sound. You listened for the engine's pitch, judged the direction, and then waited for the shadow to blot out the stars above. Then crack, crack, crack. You'd fire upward not to hit but to spook, make them break formation, force an error. And sometimes that error became fatal. One night outside Elbing, we set 5 fires in an open field and dug in nearby with 4-man teams. Each man had a Mosin, one had a German flare pistol, and one had a stopwatch. We timed the passes. 2 minutes between sweeps. That meant the planes were circling, predictable. Sokolov made the call. On third pass we fire. On the third pass, as the droning came low over the field, we saw it. Just a shadow against the sky, fat and slow. A Heinkel. We fired 18 rounds, not one direct hit. But the pilot rattled, banked too hard, clipped a tall pine, and spun into a burning corkscrew into the trees. The fire lit up the sky. We found the wreckage the next morning. And Sokolov, in his blood-cracked voice, said, "Even shadows bleed." By early November, we were down to 4 men. No replacements, no reinforcements. We weren't even on the official roster anymore. We were ghosts of the Red Army, moving with frontline divisions as they poured into German territory. We shared food with tank crews, stole ammo from abandoned bunkers, and traded favors for boots and oil. We were dirty, skeletal, half-mad. But when the planes came, we stood. November 13th, 1944, a bridge over the Vistula. It was a critical crossing. 2 pontoon bridges hastily assembled by engineers under constant harassment from the air. A lone Ju-87 came in low that morning, one of the last still flying. It screamed over the frozen water, lined up for a precision drop. The engineers scattered. No AA in place. No support. Just us. Sokolov didn't wait for the order. He walked out onto the bridge as the Stuka approached, rifle in hand, coat flapping in the wind like a banner. He knelt, aimed, and fired. The bomber didn't falter. It dropped its payload. But too late. The bomb struck water, useless. And then the Stuka's nose tipped forward. Smoke trailed from its engine. A second shot from behind, Dyachenko, lying prone in the reeds, had struck something critical. The plane pitched, dipped, and smashed nose first into the frozen bank. We ran. Through snow and smoke, we tore through the impact crater, rifles raised. Inside, the pilot was alive, barely. He coughed blood, blinking through cracked goggles. He looked up at Sokolov. "You don't even have flak," he muttered. Sokolov looked down at his battered Mosin, cracked stock wrapped in wire and cloth. "This is flak," he said. "Kill 33. That night we gathered in the ruins of a barn. Snow blew through the broken roof. We drank stale vodka from a tin cup passed between us. Sokolov sat wrapped in a horse blanket, coughing quietly, his eyes glassy. "I'm done," he said. We stared. "I've given the sky enough." The next morning he was gone. No note, no sound, just vanished. Some said he wandered into the woods to die. Others believed he'd been taken by headquarters, hauled off for debriefing, maybe even interrogation. I believed something else. I believed he became the sky. But our mission did not die. We kept going. 3 men now, then 2. Then just me. I don't know why I kept going. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was the feeling of standing under a hostile sky and refusing to bow. Maybe it was the sound of a bullet cracking through air above you, a reminder that you could fight back, even against gods. By December, I was attached to an artillery regiment near Gdansk. One night, a Ju-88 came in low over our depot. I was on the roof, repairing a tarp. I raised the Mosin, now wrapped in oilcloth and prayer, and fired once. The left engine burst into flame. I didn't cheer, I didn't tell anyone. Just watched as the plane wheeled out over the sea and vanished into the Baltic black. That was my last shot. Somewhere, deep in the archives of the Soviet military, there may still be a tattered notebook filled with names and numbers. 34 confirmed kills. Over 100 engagements. Dozens of pilots who never made it home. All brought down by the impossible. By men with bolt-action rifles and the audacity to look up. Wars end quietly. Not with speeches or songs, but with frost on old boots and orders that no longer come. When Berlin finally fell and the artillery stopped barking at the horizon, the frontline soldiers didn't cheer. They exhaled. They sat down in mud, snow, rubble, whatever was beneath them, and just stopped. I was in the ruins of Königsberg when the war officially ended. I hadn't fired my rifle in weeks. The Luftwaffe had withered away, grounded or obliterated. The skies were quiet now. Not ours, not theirs, just silent. I cleaned my Mosin one last time. The barrel pitted. The stock so worn it had grooves from my knuckles. 34 planes. 34 impossible kills with a rifle not meant for gods. But that wasn't the number that haunted me. It was the number of faces we'd lost. Sokolov, Yuri, Dyachenko, Mikhailov, Ivan, even the political officers who stopped writing notes and started firing with us when the frost turned red. Only I remained. And for a time, it felt like the silence had killed me too. Then one day a truck came. An officer in a crisp new uniform stepped down and handed me a sealed envelope. Red wax, ministry stamp. "Comrade," he said, "you're requested in Moscow." I thought it was a mistake. Me, a foot soldier, a ghost with a bolt-action rifle and one set of clothes. But 2 days later, I was in a railcar rattling toward the capital, past endless forests and burnt-out towns, my rifle wrapped in a burlap sack at my feet. And when I arrived, they took me not to a barracks, but to a hall. An old marble building with banners draped from the ceiling. I remember the smell, polish, paper, faint ink. A clerk handed me a form. Zagraditria Dvozdishnoy Streli, after action assessment. Below it a file, thick, heavy, stamped, restricted. Inside were pages I didn't expect to see. Typed reports, maps, enemy aircraft loss lists, Western correspondence clippings, diagrams of bullet trajectories, even photographs of crashed German aircraft with handwritten notations, entry point consistent with 7.62 rifle fire. At the back, a sheet titled, Probability Analysis, Infantry Small Arms Effectiveness versus Low-Altitude Aircraft. I remember the last line. While unconventional and unorthodox, the results suggest that under certain conditions, concentrated rifle fire can disrupt or destroy hostile aircraft at low altitude. Morale and psychological impact on enemy aviation units, significant. I sat in a cold chair for 3 hours before a colonel walked in. He wore thick glasses and spoke with a quiet, rehearsed tone. You were part of the air denial rifle platoons. I nodded. You were the last. I said nothing. He placed a small velvet box on the table, opened it. Inside a medal, Red Star gold trim. But no name. No citation. He slid it forward. This never happened. I took the medal and left. I didn't wear it. Didn't show it. I wrapped it in paper and placed it inside the buttstock of my Mosin Nagant, then sealed it shut with melted wax and crushed coal dust. Somewhere that rifle still exists. Maybe buried, maybe burned, maybe rusting in an attic. But inside it is the only proof that, for a short time, men on the ground challenged the gods above and won. The Americans would later debrief Luftwaffe prisoners. One, a bomber pilot named Gerhard Ulrich, recounted flying over Belarus in 1944. He said he'd been briefed about Russian sharpshooters who aim for engines. He said, we started calling them sky snipers. He said, every time I dove, I imagined a red-eyed man below, just waiting to punch a hole through my cockpit. Then he said nothing more. Years passed. And like all myths, the story faded. Modern historians dismiss the reports as exaggeration, propaganda, or confused battlefield chaos. They argued the laws of physics. They pointed to probability charts. They said, it's not possible. But I never needed charts. I had scars on my palms from working frozen bolts. I had the echo of Jericho sirens still buried deep in my ears. I had the faces of comrades etched into the frost-bitten corners of my memory. And I had the sky, that great terrible sky, finally quiet. I never returned to my village. It was gone, burned to ash in 1942. I worked as a machinist in Novgorod. Quiet work, oil-stained hands. I kept a small notebook with sketches of aircraft silhouettes just to remind myself that they were real. Sometimes I'd sit on the roof of the factory and look up. I'd think about Sokolov standing on that bridge, rifle raised, daring steel and fire to come closer. I'd think about Yuri's shot at the observation balloon, so precise it broke the silence of an entire battalion. I'd think about the man in the Heinkel, who looked up just before his plane burst into flame. And I'd remember what Sokolov said. They're not gods, they just forgot how close the ground can reach. In 1963, I received a letter. It was from a man in Leipzig, an archivist of Luftwaffe wreckage reports. He said he'd found a file labeled Unexplained Losses, Ostfront. Among them, 37 aircraft marked cause unknown, all within a 6-month window. All low altitude, all near sectors where we had operated. He ended with, "If your story is true, then perhaps some of these belong to you." I never replied. Some things are better left in the sky. Today, when I hear people say, "Rifles can't shoot down planes," I smile. Because they're right. They can't. Unless you're desperate, starving, surrounded. Unless you're aiming with every drop of hatred and hope in your body. Unless you're not trying to hit the plane. You're trying to hit the myth that you're powerless. We were never supposed to win. But for a little while, on a dozen fields from Vitebsk to the Vistula, Soviet infantrymen aimed their bolt-action rifles at the heavens and reminded the world that even gods can fall.